So the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has unveiled the government's tax and spending plans in the House of Commons. The sort of headline decision is to reduce employee national insurance, so that's most of us, national insurance by 2% to 10%, saving a few £100 a year. Let's talk to Natasha Clark about that and much else besides, LBC's political editor. I want to start with Rachel Reeves, actually. That was a bit of a barnstorming speech from her, a barnstorming response from her. She seemed like a woman in a hurry, Natasha.
She was pretty happy, wasn't she, I think, with that autumn statement, because it gave her a lot to come back on. And obviously they've all been dissecting the Office for Budget Responsibility's financial figures, and they found quite a lot to say. And she stood up and said some of this in the House of Commons just now, saying that actually the economists predict that inflation's going to be higher for longer, that our taxes are still going to be higher up, that growth has been revised down. So obviously Jeremy Hunt standing up trying to say, happy January, guys, I'm going to give you a big tax cut in the new year. But some of the small print and some of the details that are just emerging from all these financial statements that we're just getting in now show that actually the economy and the picture is not all that rosy. And for Jeremy Hunt to say, we've turned a corner and it's now time for these big tax cuts and it's now time to get the economy firing all cylinders again. Actually, the truth of that is, if you look at some of these financial figures, that our economy is still not going to be in a hugely great position for the next few years, and inflation going to be higher, growth going to be lower for a long time to come.
But from his perspective, I suppose the purpose of how he framed it there, those particular tax cuts, how he framed it, there was a touch of electioneering campaigning going on there, wasn't it? Which, and again, the fact that he's bringing forward some emergency legislation to bring forward some of those tax changes before April would suggest maybe a spring election.
Potentially, but I think it's just really that Jeremy Hunt wants to get that cash in your pocket even quicker, because he knows that that election, whenever it does come, the Tories are so far behind in the polls already. And is this going to be enough to finally shift that dial? Just a quick recap of some of the points that we got there. Benefits and pensions going to rise up in line with that high rate of inflation. So benefits will be up 6.7%, pensions up 8.5%, extra money off your energy bills if you agree to electricity pylons in your back garden, a back to work drive, a minimum wage boost. So yes, a lot's in there for obviously the everyday worker to get a little bit more excited about. And yes, I think it is the perfect sweetener before a general election. And obviously we weren't expecting to see quite so many of these big tax cuts until next year. So obviously we know that Rishi Sunak wants to cut income tax. Stamp duty had also been floated, and inheritance tax obviously mooted as well for the last few weeks. We weren't expecting to see any of those now until the budget, where these sort of giveaways might get even bigger in an attempt to woo everybody over, a bit of a bribe for the electorate, some might say. And some might also just say, this is the Tories just getting really desperate now, isn't it? They're so far behind. You know, these resets haven't worked. Rishi Sunak's conference speech hasn't worked. This is the only thing that he's got left. And, you know, he can't possibly wait between January and April to bring in those tax cuts. He has to do them ASAP and try and get that money in your pocket as quickly as possible to try and win back your vote.
And from a business perspective, there was a lot in there about business taxes and business expenses. Let's look at that full expensing for businesses. That's not just, I had a cup of coffee and I'm going to get some tax relief on that. It's about investment. It's about private sector businesses investing in kit, in developing, building, you name it. They can get full tax exemption on that, tax relief on that. And yet running alongside that, I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed this, that very early on, people like Paul Johnson from the IFS and others, people like Henry Morrison from Northern Powerhouse Partnership, saying that unless you have investment spending in the public sector, in transport infrastructure and the like, that's only half the job done. And yet he's announced a freeze in investment spending in the public sector. So he's already coming in for some criticism from that's a bit of a one-legged thing for business rather than full-throated help.
Yeah, I think overall businesses will look at this package and go, actually, this is not a bad package of investment for us. Speeding up planning reforms, full expensing made permanent. That means essentially if you invest, every pound you invest, you get 25% back in a form of tax relief. That's something that businesses have been called for. The extension of those business rate support, especially for pubs and hospitality, and obviously in the run up to Christmas, they will find that very welcome. Also cutting taxes for the self-employed, abolishing those class 2 and class 4 But yes, there was, of course, a lot that wasn't in there. We didn't hear a lot about the NHS, about schools, about climate change. And already I've got comments in my email inbox from Greenpeace who are saying that actually we really hoped the Chancellor would announce more investment into climate change infrastructure to try and get us ready for net zero. So, of course, in every financial statement, there are holes that we will obviously start to pick at and start to look at what are the things he didn't say. Obviously, this is probably the second to last fiscal statement that we will have before an election. To me, actually, it suggests that probably we will have another big budget. And then, like I say, will they make that decision to have an election quite soon after that? It depends how big the giveaways will be in the next budget, and depending on how well the economy is doing, whether those waiting lists are falling, whether inflation is going to be falling as is predicted. But, according to those numbers, it doesn't look like actually if Rishi Sunak were to wait a few extra months, according to some of these figures I've been looking at from the OBR, it probably wouldn't make much of a difference in terms of the economy either.
I felt something of a cynical framing of where the workforce is going to come from. When he announced those changes that we talked about earlier in the week relating to people out of work and on benefits because they've been signed off as unable to work full stop or for the foreseeable, he's saying, no, we'll get them back into work. Too many people have been signed off and we'll get them back into work. Labour's plan is to increase immigration. That's a strange sort of offsetting of one group against another, isn't it? It felt very clumsy to me.
Yeah, and I think the Chancellor's sort of point here was that immigration can help boost the economy in terms of getting more people in, paying more taxes, but obviously for the Tory backbenchers that's seen as a downside. Allowing more immigration in a post-Brexit environment is something that the Conservative Party have been very keen to not talk about in the last few years. But we have seen immigration going up and up and up. In terms of the last figures, I think it was 600,000 net migration in those last set of figures. And we are actually going to get more statistics on that tomorrow. So we will see whether that number has come down at all. But yes, in terms of that back to work drive, it's probably just important to say that this won't be getting people back into the workplace at all. These are only for new benefit claimants. So in terms of that pocket of people that are already out of work, getting them back into the workplace, these reforms won't apply to them at all. It's only for people that will be coming on to new benefits, and they won't come in until 2025 at the earliest, if they come in at all, because obviously we know that if Labour do win the next election, they're probably going to do something very different with their welfare benefits. But yes, for the Chancellor to talk about back to work, and it's obviously something that him and the Prime Minister obviously care a lot about, trying to boost our growth, and they think that the more people that are on benefits, the more people are signed off long-term sick, that is actually damaging our economy. And it's a very thin line to tread. I think I just wanted to double check this before I said it, but I think I heard that people shouting nasty party at the Conservatives when Jeremy Hunt was making this statement, and it does risk the Conservatives being branded again as the nasty party if they're going to have such a strict clamp down on benefits. While it might be very popular in some parts of the Conservative Party, it is obviously very unpopular in other parts, especially on the left and in the Labour Party.
Well, thank you very much, Natasha, for now. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Your calls now on 0345 6060 973. If you have been wavering as to whether to vote for the Conservatives again or for the first time in the next general election, anything in this to convince you one way or another, and whatever you've heard in there that alludes to your life, what change will it bring? What help will it bring? Is it enough to compensate for the difficulties that you've experienced in the last 13 years? 0345 6060 973.